Thank you for coming to Commit Your Code. Today I'm with Matt Croak, developer, bootcamp grad, and just phenomenal human being all around. Thank you very much for being here today with me, Matt. I genuinely appreciate you taking this time. And I really want to kind of find out who you are and what you're about. So why don't we start at the beginning? What was life like before tech? What were you doing? And what interests you in the idea of tech?
Yeah. Well, I did a little bit of web development work in college, mostly just like HTML, CSS. So that was kind of my first exposure to it. And I thought it was cool that like I could make something and like see it online. You know, when I graduated, I didn't get a job in tech because my main focus, sorry, was in like video production. So I was a post-production assistant on ABC on the set of Quantico season 2. And yeah, it was an interesting experience. I couldn't get as much out of the creativity that I was hoping to get. Like traditionally I had worked, like I would shoot my own footage and edit it so I could really be inserted in every part of the creative process. Whereas here I wasn't even allowed to like edit anything yet. So, you know, it was mostly getting people coffee and invoicing and stuff like that. Which is fine. You know, I know in like many industries, you kind of have to start at more entry level. But, you know, I looked at people who were working above me and they didn't seem to like really enjoy what they were doing.
Like, what would you say, at least in that position, what would have been like a highlight moment for you? What would have been a low moment for you? And what was the moment where you really said, you know what, this isn't for me?
I'd say like a high moment for that was when I met Priyanka Chopra. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but that was like really cool. Yeah. So that was definitely a high moment. And then just meeting like other people who had been like on TV and stuff. That was definitely cool. I guess it wasn't really there isn't like a specific low point. I think it was just after I got to like talk with the editors and the editors' assistants. I kind of was waiting for this like sort of inspirational moment. And I didn't really get that. So after I had talked to them, I kind of felt like, okay, I talked to everybody. I'm not really sure what to do now. So I kind of just went back to my like, day to day. I think it really was when I had like, so it was like 12-hour days and you can only do so much invoicing and like coffee getting. So I had a lot of downtime, and that's when I kind of revisited a portfolio that I had worked on in college, like for my own like personal website to like, promote videos I'd made and stuff like that. And then as like the demand for that site grew, I started to learn JavaScript. And I think once I started to get into JavaScript, I started to feel like a bit more legitimate. Not that people who don't do JavaScript are illegitimate, but like, it started to feel more like web development, like programming, rather than just like putting content, on a web page and stuff. So I think that was the moment where I was like, I could see myself doing this.
I always say, especially the beginners, like JavaScript is your very first taste of like a real programming language, as opposed to just HTML and CSS. Like you're having to think in a new way. So when you're actually getting there, now you're like, oh, this is where the problem solving is coming in. Oh, now I can create a function to do this problem and this solution and follow this set of instructions. That's when it really starts coming together and you realize, oh, I enjoy this or I don't. What were you using at that time, like to learn JavaScript and learn more? What were you doing?
I pretty much was just, I got like introduced to Stack Overflow like a while back in college, but I hadn't really used it much. So I kind of got reintroduced to that when I was starting to learn JavaScript. Yeah, and then just like, W3 schools, stuff like that, tutorials on YouTube. And then, yeah, that's kind of when I came across the curriculum for FlatIron. So I was able to like dabble with that a little bit.
So that leads to my next question. What was your path in tech? Like, what way did you go to further your education and try to break in the industry?
I enrolled in FlatIron's software engineering immersive. I think like July 2017. Yeah, so I enrolled in that, and I was kind of like, all right, if I'm gonna really try to do this as a career, I should, really try to do this boot camp, because not only do they teach you a lot of valuable skills, but their business development or their career development services were also pretty notable. Yeah, and I was able to speak to alumni and stuff and like get their perspective, and it seemed like a pretty good option for me in terms of becoming like a professional developer.
And what appealed to you about FlatIron Schools as opposed to self-taught route, or maybe just going to a meetup and learning something? What about the school attracted you?
Really, it just seemed like a very efficient process. Like the initial lessons that I went through, I liked how it was structured, and I liked, the like audio explanations and stuff like that from Avi. And I don't know, I just felt like it was a very conducive environment to like someone who's a first time learner, because you can be self-taught, and I was kind of doing that initially, but I did, I still found that I was moving a little slower than I wanted to. And so I thought, if I can get through Flatiron, this can really like kickstart my actual like career search. So
I could totally see that. I know sometimes, even for me, when I'm learning something on my own, my speed definitely increases when I have someone with expertise or knowledge kind of guiding my way. So that totally makes sense. So you enroll in Flatiron. How does it go for you from the get go? Like, what are you learning? What are you picking up on? Like, how's it going for you?
they started us off, so it was 5 modules. The first module was Ruby. Module 2 was Ruby on Rails. Then it was JavaScript, React, and then the last module was like our final full stack application. So the first module, I did fail, because I was kind of still stuck in the more associative mindset that I think I had in college, where like you could kind of, cram for like a test and stuff. And that didn't work here, because it involved a lot more problem solving, and I couldn't just like memorize, specific, Java or like Ruby functions and stuff like that, or Ruby methods, I should say. So that was a bit of a rude awakening. But yeah, and I really went through a period of doubt, thinking like, like imposter syndrome is like real. And I was like, this is maybe not the right thing for me to do. Maybe I should go back to post-production, or, maybe I should try to get as much money back as I can. And my cousin was really helpful with me. He was really encouraging, because he was doing Dev Bootcamp at the time. And he was actually living with me, my mom, and my sister in Brooklyn, because both of our classes were in New York City. And, he was like, dude, we've been doing like this pre-work like all summer. We've been like putting in like, 10, 12 hours a day learning this, like, you should really just give it one more shot. Like, don't throw in the towel just yet, as cliched as that sounds. But it really paid off. That's when I really was able to develop a new way of learning that was a lot more applicable, I think. And it really became more like problem solving, as opposed to like associating different things with problems at hand. It was mostly like abstracting out, the different parts of a problem, and like, what can I use to achieve that? And then it would kind of, it became a lot more organic, and I was actually able to learn things a lot quicker. Yeah. And then the learning curve, it just shot up from there.
Thank you for being so honest about you actually going through a hardship and failing that first module, because I can't tell you how many times I have a conversation with somebody and it's all sunshine and rainbows and there's butterflies in the sky, and no one really talks about like, man, this was tough. Like, it did not click for me, and I really questioned whether or not I was doing the right thing. And I think when you go through those moments, it makes you appreciate the end result that much more, because you could succumb to that idea of, this is not for me, I'm just going to go back to what I was doing before, or I'm just going to drop this idea, or I'm going to persevere through this. I'm going to commit to this action that I said that I was going to commit to, and I'm going to rock it out. So you failed that first module. What do you think, outside of the mindset that you described of, things not clicking, but what do you think was one of the hardest things that, what for you at least, was to grasp? Like, what was the difficulty you were facing besides just the thought process?
I guess it was sort of developing like a programmatic approach to things. Like, you can memorize all the different like methods of Ruby, but like, in order to actually, be able to apply that, you have to go through it and you have to build more stuff. And I was very preoccupied with getting through the lessons like as quickly as I could, because like everybody else was like moving quicker, and I felt a little, insecure about that. But ultimately it was like a disservice to myself, because I wasn't really absorbing anything that I was working on. I would read the explanations and then I would just, move on to like the next one. So the second time around, I basically just told myself, I'm going to take as much time as I need. I'm not going to like rush through these. And yeah, I didn't get quite as many lessons done, but, I passed, and it was a lot easier. Like I remember taking that code challenge the first time and I was like, oh my God, I don't know anything. And then the second time I was like, I got this. It's nothing. Yeah. Not quite that easy, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's never that easy, but still. Yeah, what's interesting about that is you kind of touch on one thing that I tell people all the time, especially learners. Comprehension matters more than completion. And when you
Yeah.
actually understand what you're doing as opposed to going through the motions, that's when you're making your most valuable skills evident to yourself and to what you're doing. So if you're just rushing through to get something done, you're just going to have to redo it again and again and again. I'd rather you go slower and actually understand what's going on and understand what's going on in the background, as opposed to saying, I'm supposed to put a function here and it's supposed to do this and I don't know why. So the fact that you figured that out relatively quickly, because I can tell you some junior developers don't really even understand that, and they kind of find themselves in this like really stuck pattern. So that's an amazing skill set to learn at such a early stage in your learning process. So kudos to you. But
Thanks.
I would say now that you've made it through the program, what is your next steps? Like, what are you doing? By the way, congratulations on graduating. So what are
Thank
you
you.
doing now after that graduation? Like, what do you do? What's your next steps?
Oh, well, after that, I started to go through the interviewing process through Flatiron, and I was able to get a job as a web developer for a real estate company. And I worked there for like 2 months, and then they brought me on full time as web developer and IT director. And I don't have an IT background, but it wasn't like too complex. It was just like 2 offices. And yeah, and it's a good organization, but I just feel like they didn't really have a grasp on like the technological aspect of it, and like the demands of what they were asking us. Like they didn't understand the scale of what they were asking us, and like the time frame and stuff. It was just me and one other developer, and he was doing like pretty much all the back end stuff. Yeah, I think after like 6 months, they actually let me go, and then I kind of re-entered. I felt more confident. Like I was like, okay, I have experience. Like this next job will like come a lot easier. And it was really like sobering, because it took me like 3.5 to 4 months to like find that second job. And it was basically, I would go to meetups with like kids that I did the program with. I would, just apply online to everything. I tried to like reach out to recruiters and stuff. And then eventually, the job that I have now was just like a Glassdoor posting that I applied to for a React developer. And, the rest is history.
If anyone knows me and if they follow me, they know I'm a huge, huge advocate for meetups. I think meetups are phenomenal. I run meetups. I run some of the, most active meetups in my town. I do talks at meetups all over the country, really all over the world. What about a meetup in your eyes in that situation was valuable? Why were you going to it? What were you gaining out of it? And would you recommend others to go to a meetup as well?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, for sure. Initially I was a little intimidated just because I felt like, I was like sort of selling myself to people and I wasn't really sure what to expect. But like, when you get there, at the end of the day, everybody's trying to do the same thing that you're doing. So like, it's not like, it's almost like a little bit of an imposter syndrome that you feel like, oh, I shouldn't be like among these people. But, ultimately, if they didn't want to network and meet up with people, they wouldn't have gone to a meetup. So I think the value comes from not just creating like connections, but also really, it's really that like interpersonal communication that you develop with someone. I feel like it becomes a lot more organic, and you start to learn more about like, even like where they grew up, or like, pitfalls that they've experienced recently and stuff like that, rather than just like kind of the superficial, these are my skills, this is the job I'm looking for, you know. So I feel like you get a lot more of the more personal details from somebody, and when you get the more personal details, it feels like a more legitimate connection, as opposed to just like, here's my card, call me if you need me. I do like, I write posts on Medium, and I like, answer
That's
questions
awesome.
and stuff on Stack and stuff like that. Like I still try to be a part of the community. And I also try to work on like personal projects like as much as I can, because as much as I like the work I'm doing, at my job, I do want to make like, my own little things like, React chess, or like a text editor, like stuff like that.
Really awesome that you're still staying connected to the community and helping out, which is what I feel like most people in tech do. That's actually the reason why I personally fell in love with tech, was people like you that are active in helping others, that you're trying to give them resources or answer questions or help them level up as well. And you don't really find that in a lot of industries.
Yeah.
I come from the gas station industry. It definitely doesn't happen there. And I don't know how it was on Quantico, but I don't feel like everybody's going out of their way to raise everybody up in certain entertainment environments. So I don't know how it was there, but I feel like the love and the appreciation and that community aspect in tech is unlike any other, at least that I've
Yeah.
seen.
Oh, for sure. It's like that kind of open source spirit, where it's like we're all trying to solve problems, and someone else probably knows like the line of code you're missing, or whatever. And it's, I really do like the contribution that like people offer. Like nobody's like trying to hoard the information for themselves. And I feel like that's really important, especially in terms of like just connectivity and like innovation. I feel like that's how we can get to solutions faster.
You've gone through this boot camp not once but twice, and you have all this experience now. So surely when you go to work, you know all the answers to all the questions that you're presented with all the time, right?
Absolutely. No, I don't. No, definitely not. I mean, I'm definitely confident in like my abilities, but yeah, I mean, everything, like every feature request, some of them are simpler than others, I think, at least for me. But I get plenty where like they ask for something that I haven't like worked with. Like recently, I had to implement a feature that like downloaded a bunch of React components as like PNGs, and I never knew how to do that. And there's actually a library that like helps you do that. And that was like pretty challenging, but I came out of it knowing something new, and it was pretty cool.
I love that because, at least for beginners, they all think I need to know everything in order to be somewhat of a decent developer. And I feel like that's the farthest thing from the truth. And so when you're presented with these opportunities or these questions or these challenges that you just don't have the answers to, what is your process to try and find the solution for that? Like, what are you doing?
Just Googling, that's really like, I feel like that's like the developers like first tool is like just get really good at Googling stuff. Stack Overflow is your friend, and the errors that you encounter are ultimately your friends, because you know it's very likely that, or it's probably pretty much guaranteed that someone else has also encountered that. So if you put that error in a Google search, you might get a pretty quick result on like Stack Overflow, or maybe like a Medium post about it or something. So
You know what's funny about that is I used to beat myself up to memorize everything. I felt like you need to know everything under the sun in order to be effective as a developer. And I remember it was like my first week in my first job, and I go to this developer. He's got like over 20 years of experience, like the smartest dude I ever met, even till this day, like just smart. And I go to him with this problem, and he's like, "Oh, I really don't know," and just starts Googling right in front of me. And my mind blew like right in that moment. Like, hold on, you don't have the answer? You've been here 20 years? And that's when I was like, it's okay to Google. And then that's
yeah,
also kind of when it clicked for me. Like, Stack Overflow wouldn't be as big and useful as it was if real developers weren't on here all the time asking their own questions, trying to find solutions as well. It would just be a resource for beginner level questions as opposed to what you actually face in the field. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that I'm not the only one that goes through that, but I know we all do.
Yeah, definitely.
So now you have all this experience, you're in a new job that you're thriving in. What is something that you feel that you know now that you didn't realize in the beginning that may have helped you on your journey more efficiently?
The importance of like being on a team and one that communicates effectively. Um, because initially I felt like I could, like at my first job, I felt like I could kind of do it all on my own. And I was able to. Not that I didn't talk to the other developer. He was a great guy. Um, but he worked a lot more on like back end stuff, and I worked more primarily on like front end stuff. And I was able to kind of do it, on my own, but it was pretty stressful at times. And then especially navigating, new feature requests and stuff like that. And, you know, they they would add on like more stuff, and the timeline would be fixed and stay the same, which was really stressful. And like, I wish back then I knew, a more effective way to kind of manage expectations better. Because, it was my first job and I didn't want to say like no to anything. And so I really just kind of took on a lot more than I should have. Whereas now I feel like if I think something is going to, push us beyond like the sprint deadline or whatever, I'll make that known.
My rule has always been we add padding to whatever we do just as that buffer. So, and I want to make sure we have enough time for testing everything and all that good stuff. But in the beginning, man, we were like, "Oh no, 2 weeks? Yeah, we can make a whole company in 2 weeks. Just tell us whatever you want, and we'll do
Yeah.
it." Because I didn't want for us to be. I always believe in like if you can give them the best, they'll be happy. It's just not really true all the time because at least in development, no matter how good your product is, you're gonna have something to work on somewhere. So even if you knock out everything right now, you're gonna have a lot more stuff coming in behind it. So just go through it naturally. Don't kill yourself, and you'll come out with a much better product with way less bugs instead of trying to speed through it and create all these vulnerabilities and holes that you're gonna need to patch in later. But
Yeah,
yeah, I
absolutely.
completely agree with you. Now that you know that, like, what is your plan for the next few years? Like, what are you aiming to actually achieve and do? Like, is your goal to stay exactly where you are right now, or do you have ambitions maybe even outside of tech? Like, what is on your mind for the next couple of years?
I think for now I'm like comfortable in my job. Like I still have a lot more to learn, and my manager is great. I do sort of see him as somewhat of a mentor. Like I have learned like a lot from him. But I do think, at some point in the future, like I do want to have like my own company, and I want to, you know, I want it to be like, software as a service, because I feel like it's not only lucrative, but I feel like it's something that can have like a very positive impact, as well as, make money and stuff. And it's also just exciting. Like I like working on projects. I like building things. And, when you solve a problem or like, fulfill a need, it's rewarding in itself. So I don't know when exactly that's going to happen. I think for now, I'm still trying to like learn as much as I can. And then also learn like, take a couple like business classes and stuff like that potentially in the future. So yeah, long-term goals, I do want to like have my own software company. For now, I think I'm in a good spot where I can learn a lot, as well as be, utilized well. And I do think that there is room for me to grow. So I'm pretty excited about that.
If you had to go back in time and you were talking to Matt, who's near the beginning of their first time going through Flatiron, but they're going through some hardships. Like, what would you tell yourself then to make it so that you didn't fail out that first time? Like, what could you
Slow
have told
down.
yourself?
I tell them just slow down. Like you don't have to rush through this. Nobody's gonna like penalize you for not finishing all the lessons. Like, just going through it as quickly as you can, reading the explanation and moving on immediately is not going to solidify anything. So really try to conceptualize it and even kind of mess with the original scenario and add in your own variables or like, your own unknowns and see if you can kind of push it, further than what is provided.
I agree with that on such a deep level. And I tell people, and I even told myself when I was learning, break it. break it. Figure out how to break
Yeah.
it. Once you break it, now fix it. Like, you're gonna learn so much through that process. You don't need to be hand-holded the entire way, because that real learning really happens when you're facing that error, or when you're Googling these errors that pop up, and now you're learning in that process. So I love every single thing about adding variables and taking them out and figuring out what it does on a deeper level, besides saying, how can I get to this end result the easiest and fastest way? Completely agree. If there's a junior developer that's listening right now and they're struggling to grasp these concepts, what would be something that you would advise them to do to get at least slightly better in what they're doing right now?
I mean, my first instinct is to tell them to keep building, but I'm assuming they're already building something if they're encountering an issue that they can't surpass. But I guess if they keep hitting like that roadblock or whatever, it could be a matter of sort of rolling back a bit and trying to like re-solidify more of the basics. Like maybe the issue that you're encountering is a lot harder because you don't like fully understand, the functions or the methods that you're using, or you don't fully understand like what's the most optimum method to use or the most optimal method to use. So yeah, sometimes you really do kind of bite off more than you can chew. And if you didn't take the time previously, like really take the time to like solidify, the basics and stuff, it could be more challenging in the end. And then, you end up kind of running into the same wall over and over again. It's kind of, the same concept as like, I would always encourage people to learn like vanilla JavaScript before learning like a framework. Because if you don't know, vanilla JavaScript, a lot of the stuff in React, you'll know like within the React like ecosystem kind of, but you could encounter some error that you don't really understand because it's like a native like JavaScript thing as opposed to like a React thing. So yeah, if you're running into the same issue over and over again, it might be better to kind of backpedal a little bit and make sure you didn't miss any of the, smaller bits beforehand.
I tend to agree with you on the learning the JavaScript before React. This is a very highly, highly, highly debated subject on social media, I will tell you.
Yeah.
So I will say I've spoken with many people that learned React first, and they said that is how they understood JavaScript better. And if that works for you, fantastic, do it. But if it doesn't, try starting at the beginning and going further. I personally don't know how I could have learned Angular or React without knowing vanilla JS first, but figure out what works for you and just go that path, And at the end of the day, I think we all have the same intention and hope that you just become better at whatever it is that you're setting out to do. I just hope in some way or another that you do get some positive light in your situation and you can reach whatever that it is that you're trying to reach. But I do love that point, and I do tend to agree. I don't think it's the easiest thing in the world to learn React without knowing vanilla JS first. So I always ask this question. If you were to go back in time from day one, before you picked up JavaScript, before anything, and you could either change what you were doing or go down the path of tech again, would you do it all again? Was it really worth it?
I definitely think it was. Not just from like a financial position, but like it's just a lot more rewarding. Like I still, take pictures and like I'll shoot video on occasion. I haven't really edited anything in a while, but just because you're doing this, it could take away energy from like other hobbies and stuff, but it doesn't totally isolate you. But for me, I totally would do it again. I think not just as a professional, but I think as a person, I've really become like a problem solver just in like everyday life. Like if something doesn't work, I don't like kind of put my hands up and call tech support or customer service or whatever. I try to kind of, figure it out on my own. And then if I can't figure it out myself, I like Google a tutorial or like I Google like a manual or something like that. And I feel like it's kind of, I've improved in terms of self-sufficiency. And I feel like that's just an invaluable skill to have. So I would definitely do it all over again.
Yes. You hit on something that I hate saying I say this all the time because I always say I say this all the time, but this is something that is so important. And I've spoken at prisons and things like that for prisoners that are learning how to code. And I don't think people should just learn how to code with the goal of, I want to become a developer. That's great if that's your goal. But I think even if your goal is not tech, you should know the basics of learning how to code. Number one, obviously it's the future. Tech is going to be running everything. But number two, you learn a very unique set of problem solving skills that most industries just don't have. Even if you just learn how to code and you learn the problem solving aspects, if you go into construction, no, before when I worked in construction, you got to tear a wall down, you just start hitting that wall with a sledgehammer. But now you may approach it as, well, what if I hit it in this corner? Maybe it'll come down faster, or maybe this is load bearing over here, and if I hit it at this angle, it'll come down easy. You learn to look at things in such a different way. I think that's so vital, and I love that you said that. So I always ask this one question in particular. What was your mama, I made it moment? What was that moment where you were like, mama, I made it. I did it. It all came together for me. What was that moment for you, Matt?
I really think it was when the job that I'm at now brought me on full time. Because initially I started in November and they gave me like a 3-month contract. Then they extended that contract. And then in the middle of like the second one, it was like a really casual email. They set up a time on Outlook, and they were like converting Matthew Croak to full time. And I was like, wait, it was just very surprising. It was like very casual, but at the same time I was like, oh my God, is this like real? And then, yeah, they like brought me on, and I don't know, it just felt very legitimate. Not that my first job didn't, but this job, I had worked at it for 4.5, 5 months before they brought me on full time. And I was able to see, what it was like to work for like a robust, marketing analytics company that, sells software as a service. And I don't know, it felt more like I had a job in tech as opposed to my first one, which felt like I was kind of a web developer trying to get as much done as possible. So definitely when I came on full time, that was when I was like, I did this, and I still feel imposter syndrome occasionally, like when I'm learning a new thing, but ultimately it's like, I can do this. I've been doing this and I love doing it. So
Matthew Croak, any last words or final remarks?
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been really cool talking to you because I see your content like every day, and, I never really thought I would talk to you, but here we are.
Here we are. That's the power of networking. You send out a message, you see what happens. But Matthew Croak, developer, creative, and React professional. Thank you. I appreciated every moment of this conversation.